My name is Linda Mercer. I'm 63 years old, and for 38 years I taught American history at Jefferson High School before retiring last spring. My husband, Robert, turned 65 in April, and this October marked his 40th consecutive year volunteering as the Master of Ceremonies for our town's Veterans Heritage celebration. For nearly 6 weeks, he sat at our dining room table every afternoon with a small bottle of walnut oil and a soft cotton cloth, restoring an old oak commemorative plaque that had been presented during his very first ceremony in 1985. He wanted it to look perfect for one final appearance before donating it to the local museum. At exactly 8:17 p.m. on October 11, my daughter's text arrived, and everything he had quietly prepared seemed to lose its purpose. 3 weeks later, that same plaque stood somewhere neither of us had ever imagined it would. Here's what Emily never understood about that night, or about the 40 years that came before it. Sometimes a family doesn't fall apart because of one cruel decision. Sometimes it slowly leans in one direction until one ordinary moment finally reveals where everyone's weight has been resting all along. In our family, the oak plaque represented more than Robert's volunteer service. Every October, before leaving for the ceremony, he would polish its carved border, run his thumb across the engraved dates, and smile the same small smile I'd watched for 4 decades. It became our quiet ritual. Emily grew up watching it happen from the staircase, often still wearing pajamas while eating cereal from a blue plastic bowl. She used to ask if she could carry the plaque to the car, treating it as carefully as if it were made of glass instead of solid oak. Back then, family traditions still felt balanced. But balance has a way of changing so gradually that you don't notice until you're standing on one side alone. Emily married Jason 7 years ago. Jason wasn't a bad man. He was thoughtful, hardworking, and polite. His parents, however, believed family loyalty operated like a competition. Every Thanksgiving belonged to them. Every Christmas morning started at their house. Birthdays were negotiated. Anniversaries became scheduling conflicts. If 2 family events landed on the same weekend, somehow ours was always considered more flexible. His mother liked to say, "We're just keeping traditions alive." Our traditions quietly disappeared instead. The embarrassing part is that I helped make it happen. Whenever Robert looked disappointed, I would squeeze his hand beneath the dinner table and whisper, "Let's not pressure her." Whenever Emily apologized for missing another family gathering, I'd answer, "We understand. Go enjoy yourselves." And we truly meant it. Until understanding slowly became expectation. Robert never complained. That was simply who he was. He spent 32 years working as the city's building inspector, never missing a deadline, never raising his voice in public. Even after retirement, neighbors still stopped him outside the grocery store to ask questions about permits or old homes because they trusted his judgment. He answered every question patiently, usually with a joke that made strangers laugh before realizing he'd solved their problem. That same patience followed him home. When Emily canceled Sunday lunches, he grilled the extra hamburgers anyway and delivered them to our elderly neighbors. When she forgot his birthday one year until nearly 9 o'clock that evening, he answered her call with genuine warmth, pretending he hadn't noticed the time. Watching him protect everyone else's feelings eventually became so normal that I forgot someone should have been protecting his too. The Veterans Heritage celebration meant everything to him because it wasn't about recognition. He never accepted payment. Every October, he spent nearly 100 volunteer hours organizing speakers, arranging seating charts, checking microphones, and making sure every veteran's name was pronounced correctly. He kept handwritten index cards dating back to 1985, each one carefully labeled with attendance numbers, weather conditions, and tiny notes about memorable moments. For the 40th ceremony, the town council planned a surprise tribute honoring his decades of service. Emily knew every detail because I'd emailed her the schedule on September 2nd, sent reminders on September 18th and October 3rd, and watched her reply each time. "We'll absolutely be there, Mom." Even my sister Carol had seen the confirmation during Sunday dinner. Still, as we cleared the dishes that evening, Jason's mother casually smiled and said something I dismissed far too quickly. I'm sure everything will work itself out, she said. Don't make everything so personal. At the time, I thought she was talking about scheduling. I didn't realize she was quietly telling us exactly how our disappointment would be explained. The morning of October 12th began with the comforting sounds that had always marked the week before the ceremony. At 9:40 a.m., Robert was in the garage applying one final coat of walnut oil to the oak plaque. The autumn sunlight came through the open garage door just enough to bring out the deep grain of the wood. Inside the house, I was ironing the navy jacket he reserved for every Veterans Heritage celebration. The garment bag already hung on the bedroom door. His note cards were stacked neatly beside it, tied together with a faded green ribbon he'd used for years. Everything was ready. At 8:17 p.m., my phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. Emily. I smiled before opening it. Instead, I read, Mom, we're heading to Gatlinburg tomorrow morning with Jason's family. His parents booked the cabin months ago and everyone already paid. We won't make Dad's ceremony after all. Please don't make everything so personal. We'll celebrate with him another weekend. For several seconds, I simply stared at the screen. Behind me, Robert walked into the kitchen carrying the plaque in both hands. He had just finished polishing it. The wood reflected the warm overhead light, almost like glass. He looked at my face before he looked at the phone. What happened? I handed it to him without speaking. He adjusted his reading glasses, read the message once, then quietly handed the phone back. Oh, just that. One small word. He carried the plaque to the dining room table, set it carefully on the folded linen runner I'd ironed that afternoon, and began wiping away fingerprints that weren't even there. Watching him polish something that no longer had the audience, it deserved hurt more than if he'd shouted. After nearly a minute, he smiled, a tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. They probably couldn't change the reservation. He was comforting me. Again. The room suddenly filled with memories I hadn't invited. Emily missing our 20th anniversary dinner because Jason's cousins planned a barbecue. Robert insisting it was fine. Emily leaving Thanksgiving early every single year. Robert wrapping leftovers for us to eat alone after everyone else had gone. The Father's Day breakfast she rescheduled twice before forgetting entirely. Robert saying she's busy. Life gets complicated. Every memory ended the same way. Him protecting her from disappointment. Me helping him do it. For years I believed I was keeping peace. The truth was much harder. I had been teaching everyone, including my own daughter, that Robert's kindness required no protection because it would always be there waiting. I wasn't simply someone who had been hurt. I had quietly participated. That realization settled heavier than the silence between us. Robert finally looked toward the dining room window. The veterans are still coming, he said softly. That's what matters. It sounded noble. It also sounded unbearably lonely. The next morning, I called my older sister, Denise, hoping someone else would say what I couldn't. Instead, she sighed. Linda, they're newly married compared to us. Jason's family probably had everything planned already. Don't turn this into a bigger issue than it needs to be. After we hung up, I called my cousin Mark, who had attended almost every ceremony Robert hosted. His answer wasn't much different. You know how young couples are. If you push too hard, Emily will just stop calling altogether. Let it go. Let it go. Don't make everything so personal. The words sounded different, but they asked for exactly the same thing. Shrink your expectations until disappointment becomes normal. By late afternoon, I found myself sitting on the front porch beside our neighbor, Eleanor Watkins, an 81-year-old widow who had known Robert since high school. She listened without interrupting, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. When I finished, she looked directly at me and said something no one else had. Linda, honoring someone who has given 40 years of his life isn't asking for too much. She paused before adding quietly, You're not asking your daughter to choose between families. You're asking her to remember where she learned what family means. For the first time in 2 days, someone had given me permission to stop explaining away our own heartbreak. Eleanor's words stayed with me long after she walked back across the street. That evening at 6:45 p.m., I called Emily one last time, not to argue, but to offer a compromise so generous it left every door open. She answered on the third ring. I kept my voice steady. What if you come just for the tribute? It starts at 2:00 p.m. Saturday. Stay an hour, take a picture with your dad, and leave afterward if you need to. You can still drive to Gatlinburg that evening. It's only a few hours later than you planned. There was a pause. Then another. Finally, she sighed. Mom, Jason's parents already planned brunch, then we're leaving together in one caravan. If we don't go, everyone has to wait. I understand, I said. Then maybe meet us afterward for dinner. Your dad doesn't need the whole day. He'd just like to see you. She didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the same calm certainty I'd heard growing stronger over the past several years. I already told you not to make everything so personal. Before I could respond, she continued. If we change our plans now, Jason's family will think we're unreliable. They'll remember it. I don't want unnecessary drama. I don't think your father being honored after 40 years is unnecessary. It's one ceremony, Mom. No, I answered quietly. It's 40 years of ceremonies. She exhaled impatiently. If you keep pushing this, you're going to make everyone uncomfortable. Jason will feel caught in the middle. His parents will think you don't respect them. Then Thanksgiving is going to be awkward, Christmas will probably be awkward too, and honestly, I'll remember who made it that way. It wasn't just guilt anymore. It was reputation. Future holidays. Relationships. Everything was suddenly being held hostage by one simple request. I realized then that nothing I offered would ever be enough because the conversation wasn't really about scheduling. It was about whose disappointment counted. When we ended the call, I sat at the dining room table staring at the oak plaque for nearly 20 minutes. Robert walked in carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He didn't ask how the conversation had gone. He already knew. He set one mug beside me. What are you thinking? I ran my fingers across the carved dates. For years, I said, I've been fighting to earn a better place in a system that already decided where we belong. He looked at the plaque, then at me. So what happens now? I surprised myself with the answer. We stop asking for permission to celebrate the people who show up. The words settled over the room with unexpected peace. For the first time since Emily's text, I wasn't thinking about convincing anyone. I was thinking about building something that didn't depend on their approval. The next morning, I called the community center where the ceremony would be held. Mrs. Helen Ortiz, the event coordinator, answered immediately. Before I could explain, she laughed softly. Linda, if this is about extra chairs, don't worry. We always find room. It is about chairs, I replied, but not extra ones. I asked if, after Robert's official recognition, we could reserve the smaller garden courtyard behind the building for coffee, homemade desserts, and anyone who genuinely wanted to celebrate his 40 years of service. No speeches, I said. No formal invitations. Just people who actually want to be there. Helen didn't hesitate. I'll unlock the courtyard myself. By Thursday evening, our dining room had transformed. Carol baked 2 apple pies. Eleanor made her famous pecan bars. Mark, the same cousin who had told me to let it go, called back after thinking about our conversation. I've been unfair, he admitted. Tell me what you need. I asked him to bring folding tables. He said he'd bring 6. As I arranged name cards on the tables, I deliberately wrote one more than I needed. Emily Mercer. Robert noticed it immediately. You know she isn't coming. I know. Then why set a place? I smiled gently. Because leaving someone a place isn't the same thing as waiting forever. He looked at that empty chair for a long moment before quietly nodding. It wasn't there as punishment. It wasn't there to make anyone feel guilty. It was there because love doesn't become smaller simply because someone chooses not to sit with it. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to save our old family pattern. I was making room for a healthier one to begin. Saturday arrived cool and bright, with the kind of October sky Robert always said veterans deserved. The official ceremony began precisely at 2:00 p.m., and by 2:48 p.m., Mayor Collins stepped aside from the podium to present Robert with a Crystal Service Award and a framed proclamation recognizing 40 consecutive years of volunteer leadership. Robert accepted both with the same quiet humility he'd carried through every ceremony before it. When the formal program ended, people followed the handwritten signs Helen had placed toward the garden courtyard. I expected 20 guests. 43 came. Some were veterans Robert had helped decades earlier. Others were former students of mine who remembered hearing about him in class. Neighbors arrived carrying folding chairs, homemade cookies, and stories I had never heard before. Eleanor stood near the oak plaque, welcoming everyone as though she'd been hosting the gathering for years. The plaque rested on a simple wooden easel beneath a maple tree whose leaves had already begun turning crimson. For once, it wasn't just another decoration. It was the heart of the afternoon. People signed a memory book instead of a guest register. One retired Marine thanked Robert for correctly pronouncing his late brother's name every Memorial Day. A young volunteer told him she had learned kindness simply by watching how he greeted every family before each ceremony. Robert kept insisting he hadn't done anything extraordinary. No one believed him. Later that evening, my cousin Mark called after returning home. "I heard something interesting," he said. Jason's family's vacation dinner had been beautiful. Expensive cabin. Perfect photographs. Elegant table. But half the evening had been spent explaining why Emily and Jason weren't in the family pictures posted online until much later. Apparently, several relatives had noticed they kept checking their phones. Someone had shown them photographs from Robert's celebration that neighbors had already begun sharing. Mark paused before adding quietly, "Looks like they spent the whole night watching the gathering they decided to miss." I didn't feel victorious hearing that. I only felt sad. No beautiful vacation should require comparison to prove its value. Neither should a father's 40 years of faithful service. The celebration had succeeded, but it hadn't erased what it cost. That evening, after washing the last coffee cup, I stood alone in the garden looking at the empty chair with Emily's name card still resting against its plate. No one had touched it. It remained exactly where I'd left it. Winning isn't the right word for moments like that. Because every empty chair still belongs to someone you love. A week later, Jason knocked on our front door alone. He looked exhausted. "I think Emily wants to come," he said quietly. "She just doesn't know how." For the first time, someone offered me a piece of her story without asking me to excuse it. Jason admitted that Emily had spent years believing disappointing his parents would cost her their acceptance. Somewhere along the way, keeping peace had become more important than choosing freely. Understanding that made my heart softer. It didn't make the decision hurt any less. I asked him to tell her she was welcome to visit whenever she was ready. 2 Sundays later, at 3:15 p.m., Emily stood on our porch holding no gifts, no flowers, and no rehearsed speech. I answered the door but didn't rush to fill the silence. She waited. For nearly 2 minutes. It was the first time in years no one hurried to make her comfortable before everyone else. Eventually she whispered, "Can we talk?" We sat in the living room while the oak plaque rested on the fireplace mantel behind us. She tried familiar explanations. Scheduling. Pressure. Misunderstandings. Then she tried guilt. "I guess I'm just a terrible daughter." Neither worked anymore. Finally, her shoulders dropped. She looked at me, not as someone defending a decision, but as someone's daughter. One quiet question escaped her. "Does Dad even want to see me?" "Yes," I answered. "But before anything else, you need to honor the man who's spent 40 years showing up for everyone, including you. This isn't about earning my forgiveness. It's about rebuilding what you broke with him." She nodded. Robert came in a few minutes later. The conversation between father and daughter lasted almost an hour behind the closed sunroom door. I never listened. Some moments deserve privacy more than witnesses. When they finally emerged, Emily's eyes were swollen from crying. Robert looked tired, but lighter somehow. He didn't tell me what was said. He only squeezed my hand. By the following October, our tradition had changed. The official ceremony still happened. But afterward, everyone who truly wanted to celebrate gathered beneath that same maple tree for coffee, pie, laughter, and stories. No one competed for importance. No family ranked above another. Emily came early that year. Without being asked, she carried the oak plaque from the car with both hands, exactly as she had when she was a little girl. She carefully placed it on the easel, smoothed the cloth beneath it, and stepped back without expecting praise. That small gesture told me more than any apology ever could. Today, the empty chair is still there every October. Not because we're waiting for someone to choose us, but because every family should leave room for people willing to come home with humility. 40 years of service. One text at 8:17 p.m. One empty chair beside an old oak plaque. Those numbers remind me that love isn't measured by who arrives first or speaks the loudest. The strongest families are built by the people who quietly honor what others spent a lifetime building.